Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, reparations. For African Americans, reparations are no longer just an idea. About a dozen states currently have specific programs to address the harm caused by slavery and its legacy of systemic racism. And nearly 24 cities are engaged in conversation about how to offer repair for the descendants of the millions of enslaved Africans. Boston recently announced a task force on reparations, both to study reparations and to lead a public dialogue in the community. Is a city with a fraught racial history ready to have a conversation about the harm done and the expectations of compensation for that harm? Joining us this evening, George Chip Greenidge, member of the Boston Task Force on Reparations and founder and director, Greatest Minds. Traci Griffith, director, Racial Justice Program, ACLU, Massachusetts. And Carrie Mays, youth activist, student at UMass Boston, and member of Boston's Task Force on Reparations. Welcome to you all.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. So now you two who are on the task force, Carrie and Chip, have both been very active before. So you're a youth activist, as we've said. You led the largest Black Lives Matter protest in the city. George, you've been convening for who knows how many years through various administrations and having these conversations all along. And Traci, of course, this is where you live in terms of talking about where Africans Americans are in terms of race and the legacy of slavery. So one quick thing at the top, just really quickly, because I think all of you, of course, know, and I do too, that there was slavery in Massachusetts, but a lot of folk do not know that. So let's just start there, and then we'll go from there. So speak, George, to the fact that there was slavery here.
There was, and I think what the best thing about this is that we're going to, as a community, going to have a conversation. This is bringing out all the folklore and also the history and also all the words of the community members. We're going to be able to have this kind of larger conversation of what does reparations and what does repair mean. I'm very proud that Michelle Wu, our mayor, and also our city councilors have decided to take this on, because this is something that's been brewing for years. And I think this is a great time that, I think the time is now. I think we have a lot of people that are interested. It's a national conversation. It's also a local conversation, and we're seeing the planets being aligned for us to actually bring some movement on this.
And so, Carrie, you had been meeting with groups before the task force was ever announced, just talking about this.
Yes, absolutely. So this wasn't just the effort of one person, right? This effort was intergenerational. It was community-based. And I want to say last year, a group of community organizers, leaders, activists, grassroots-based movement organizations, and leaders got together and were meeting consecutively for a whole entire year, if not almost 2 years before this ordinance even came about, right? And what we did was we met as a task, not as a task force, but as a community to say, what is this language in the ordinance going to look like? And thankfully, I was given the opportunity to be a part of the people who were a part of creating the language for that ordinance that got passed by the city council, and thankfully, Michelle Wu.
Okay. During the announcement of the Reparations Task Force Committee, Segun Idowu, Boston's Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, provided history and context of Massachusetts' role in slavery.
It's always important to remind ourselves that in 1641, not in Georgia or Florida or North Carolina or Virginia, but in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, it was John Winthrop who wrote the Body of Liberties, which codified slavery when there were 13 colonies. And so for almost 200 years, the spirit of Massachusetts truly was the spirit of America, a state which lobbied for it, which built the boats, which hired the crewmen, that allowed this institution to continue.
So Traci, what Segun just said is the reason why the ACLU has been keeping its eye on HR 40, which is the legislative bill that's been sitting in the House for quite some time. Just briefly tell us what HR 40 is.
So HR 40 basically addresses the issue of slavery. It gives us an opportunity to look at and consider the things that have resulted from slavery. The historical piece of it is it's a fact, right? Slavery happened here in the United States. It happened here in Massachusetts. And the bill allows us to look federally at the implications of that, right? Because the history is one thing, but the lingering effects of slavery are a complete another thing, right? We've got to address the things that have come as a result of slavery that finds us where we are today and the inequities that continue to exist.
All right, I'm going to quote you to you. So here are some of your words. 246 years of slavery, 99 years of Jim Crow, 86 years of lynching, then all the years fighting for civil rights, 400 plus years of systemic oppression and racism. So that's where we start when we start talking about reparations.
Right. When we add up all of those years of oppression, we find ourselves where we are today, and the effects continue on a daily basis in the lives of African Americans in the United States and here in Massachusetts. How do we address that? Because that's the point of this task force. How do we address those 400 years, plus the years of Jim Crow, plus the years that that African Americans are continuing to endure the effects of slavery? How do we address that?
Okay, so there are three phases to this task force. There's research, which you are all engaged in now, and then there's community exchange, a lot of community exchange, and then you have to recommend whatever comes out of your group and report. So I want to start with your first meeting was this week, right, George?
No, we pushed it up.
You pushed it up. Okay.
Yep,
all right. So you're preparing for your first meeting. We can see that you two are from different generations.
That's right.
So there's a real mix in the group. But the core, as I understand it, of people who are there in the group really are dealing with lineage. So that's who were the folks who came from enslaved Africans, and there should be some way to sort of trace your history back, even though we can get into the problematic nature of that.
Right on.
But those are the three phases. All right, so here you are, you're starting. You keep using the word repair as opposed to, or in addition to, let's say. In addition to reparations. Why?
Well, I wanted us to also look at some of the things that, I grew up in the 90s in Boston, and I remember the Charles Stewart, Carol Stewart Damati, and her being murdered by her husband, and was blamed on a black man. So I think we should also look at those kind of effects of stop and frisk and policing, also the war on drugs, really the issues that happened around the sentencing of people with cocaine and crack addiction and all those other things. I think all of this should be looked at as well as the way that we move forward, as we look at particularly a Boston way of how we look at the numbers, and also the history and the data as well.
And so that's the linkage from the enslavement of Africans, all of those things, because people were constricted by limited opportunities, certainly, and very much so by bias.
Right on, right on. Also, the busing, it's been amazing, and that now we're having larger community conversations, as we always have, about the effects of busing on our young children today and the families. And also, I really want to push on intergenerational poverty that we've seen in the city. I think there are certain families born and raised here have been in the cycle of intergenerational poverty, and how can we help them break through those cycles, and what are the facts behind that?
Okay, so Carrie, now I know you said that you may have certain feelings about what reparations should be, given all of the circumstances as we've described, but you're also representing other people on this task force and what they may see as what should be the result of your committee work.
Absolutely. So I think serving as a young person is a learning experience for me, and also a learning experience to be able to engage the community truly and reflectively. I think one of the biggest problems that we see when it comes to slavery and the exacerbation of systemic harm that we've seen that has originated from slavery is the erasure of history, right? I don't think anyone ever talks about, and I know because I am currently experiencing this as a young person, as a young African American woman, the negative psychological harm that the whitewashed curriculum of our textbooks have done to our psyche, right, as young people. So I think not only am I speaking for myself, but also I'm speaking for Black and brown young people out there who have experienced the exacerbation of the systemic harms of slavery. I look to bring my experience. I look to bring my unique perspective, because as young people, we have nothing to lose, right? Compared to the rest of society.
Maybe you have everything to lose.
We have everything to lose,
You know.
but we have nothing to lose but our chains. And so I want to make sure that is the main point. I think that this is a historical experience and educational process, not only for me, but the community,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because this intergenerational harm of the erasure of history, my elders, my grandparents also had to face. So it's about addressing the harms and then also looking at the harms of today, the school to prison pipelines, right? When I talk about Black Lives Matter, I don't just mean about police brutality. I mean the school to prison pipeline, the crooked criminal justice system, our schools, and all of the systemic areas in which we are suffering as a people as of today. So I think I'm bringing my perspective, I'm bringing my spunk, my Black girl magic, and I'm looking to bring a younger perspective, because when you look at the history of this country, the Children's March of Birmingham, I always talk about it because it was the catalyst for desegregation across the country, right? Fast forwarding to Black Lives Matter movement, to the BPS walkouts, where students were standing in front of militarized pepper spraying police officers. So when we look at the morality staples of our country and who has been at the forefront, risking it all for whether they lose everything or lose nothing, it has been young people, especially young Black people.
There were two little girls in that march on Bloody Sunday in Selma as well,
Right.
just to add to that,
Right,
that conversation. So the first step is research, as I've said. Have you all already hired the consultant that will do that research?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
We're right now working on the request for proposals, and we're looking for universities, we're looking for individual partners, we're looking for a number of people to come on and see how people formulate as teams to actually tackle this.
Okay, and are these meetings that you all have, this is considered a public meeting? Will they be open to the public even before you get to the community phase of it?
What would you say?
I believe so.
I believe so too. All right,
I'm not
still haven't
100%
met.
sure, right? Like we're literally right in the beginning,
Yeah.
and this has never been done before. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I want to address with you, Traci, something that's interesting. So we mentioned at the beginning of this that cities and towns are moving individually, as Boston has
Yes.
now, to look at this and take steps. And in some places, steps have already been taken. But it's going city or state
Yes.
piecemeal.
That's right.
Speak to what you think about that, and is this the way it's going to be, or will HR 40 ever have a chance to sort of take off and bring it all together from a federal standpoint?
Right. So let's be clear. There is not enough money in the United States to compensate the descendants of African slaves. And if we're looking at it in terms of piecemeal, town by town, city by city, there are going to be limited resources to address it financially. I'm not saying that financially is the only way, but there will be limited resources. Because slavery was an institution of the entire United States, it benefits us to look at it as a federal issue, right? And we're hoping, right, that the bill will get through on a federal level, because that really is the only way that it can be addressed equitably. And it might be different. It might look different in Oklahoma than it looks in Florida, than it looks in Massachusetts, in terms of implementation. But clearly, it's an issue that is a nationwide issue, and it needs to be addressed in that way.
Okay, so now you've hit at the point that everybody gets very exercised about, and that's what is the compensation? As you said, you're in the early stages, so you're not even talking about that yet. Right. But that is what folks are saying. Probably you're getting a lot of phone calls from people who heard about San Francisco.
That's right.
The San Francisco committee just agreed to consider a proposal that every descendant of African slaves in that community, in terms of reparations, would be entitled to $5 million each, which is a startling number. That's in addition to some other things. So respond to what you all know is coming and has been coming, which is the focus on reparations, and why people say, I wasn't here, I didn't do that. Why should you be talking about compensation in that way?
Carrie, you want to go first? Go for it.
Oh yeah, you see me give you the look, right?
I gave you the look. I gave it right to you, you know?
That's a great question, because I think people need to understand that we are suffering at the expense of white supremacy, right? Privilege still is a very real concept. It's a very real thing in America, and I think that people don't understand that what happened 400 years ago, they are still benefiting from the ramification and the consequences of the labor of Black people. Right? Like, all of this is inevitably tied together. You cannot talk about the systemic issues of today without talking about slavery, without talking about colonialism, without talking about how this is a connected timeline. So the people who are benefiting from the system today are benefiting at the expense of the labor, the suffering, the pillaging of our communities, and still are suffering at the expense, because when you look at the inequities of the wealth gap in Boston,
Right on.
you know, Black Americans not being worth $8, but making economically on an average of $8 versus white people $247,500. That's today. We have a problem. So do not tell me that because I wasn't alive, because you're still benefiting from the systemic ramifications of slavery at the expense and labor of Black people today.
Do you want to add to that, George?
Definitely. We have to also look at, you know, the history of redlining in this country. Also the way that the GI Bill was written.
Yes.
All these different things are pieces that have not helped African Americans be able to move forward.
Yes.
And so there's a number that can be attached to that. And I think we're starting to look at ways, and then we hope the city council and the mayor, along with some recommendations for us, to be able to put those numbers into some kind of community conversation so we can actually move forward on this.
So, as you said earlier, Traci, what it looks like in Oklahoma may not be what it looks like in Massachusetts, and how you calculate it may be different. So, speak about compensation as we are now beginning to look at it through this task force here in Boston.
First, I'd like to reiterate something that Carrie said, right? It's the question of, before we can get to repairing or reconciliation, we've got to deal with the truth.
Acknowledgement.
Right? We've got to deal with the truth. And I think that's the place where you start. There has to be some acknowledgement that harm has occurred before we can even get to the point of compensation. And the term compensation, I think, and I would really strongly urge, the task force to look at the multiple ways in which compensation could happen, right? It isn't necessarily a dollar amount. And I might, it really feels as if there's so many other ways in which it can be addressed. And I think they really need to be creative about that, right? The reality of handing people $5 million, that's absurd. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, let's be truthful, right? That's not going to happen. And so they've got to be creative about the ways in which this kind of compensation happens, because unless we have something that is realistic, right, that will benefit people, that will compensate people and recognize that the harm that's been done, again, I'm not sure that we can ever do that. But if we can at least move in that direction and be creative about what that looks like, then I think we're moving in the right direction. But there are many different ways in which to address that. And I think George is absolutely right. We look at the effects of redlining. If we look at it economically in the harm that's been done, then I think we're much better at figuring out ways to compensate for the economic harm. But we also have to think about, Black maternal health, right? And the ways that racism has played into that, and slavery has led to the inequities in that. Inequities in housing, right? Right here in Boston. As you said, busing. There are a number of different things that have affected and brought us to where we are today. So we've got to look at a number of different ways in which to address those issues and compensate for the harms.
Like, we even had a 20 years ago, we don't even have to go back so far. We even had a city administration that believed that we did not even need any more black restaurants in the city. They said it flat out there. I mean, you know, we also look at the way that liquor licenses have been distributed, and how the numbers are very high in the Irish and Italian communities, and the African American communities are very limited, and how this all that. You also got to look at taxi medallions and the whole way that that's been given out and so forth. These are all kind of wealth building opportunities that African Americans and black Bostonians have been cut out by laws and systematic ways, and ways that our city government has been able to, you know, guise things that to say, oh, everything's equal, but it really isn't.
Right. Our, you know, our conceptualization of what harm looks like when it comes to money, right? That's only material. And the reparations conversation can't just be about materialism. When you think about post-traumatic slave disorder, is an actual psychological harm that has happened, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the consciousness, right, of the black community has been sabotaged. And so I think that what people have to get through their head is that just because black people get reparations does not mean that racism is going to be over. Reparations is not going to stop police from killing black men in the streets. Reparations is not going to stop black women from dying at the highest demographical number when it comes to the medical field. Reparations is not going to stop the mass incarceration machine system that we're seeing today. So I think that, you know, once people have the conversation about reparations, they think that's where it ends. No, that's where the conversation should be propelled, right? This is what amplifies the conversation to saying, okay, how do we equitably quantify? We can't, no amount of dollar amount is going to quantify the harm, right? But how can we equitably compensate black people and continue the conversation for what healing looks like for us beyond materialism? Because there has been a lot of harm done beyond what money can quantify. But the money should be there, right? Black people deserve their dollars and to get paid.
But also, I just want to make sure that, you know, there are many corporations here from the Boston area, universities as well, that also need to be a part of this discussion about the ways and traditions that they've been promoting, you know, the ways that African Americans have not been able to succeed in this climate in this city. So I think we need to add those. I think we should add a line in there to especially the philanthropic organizations in town and the ways they've been perpetuating systematic racism.
And we should say some of that is happening. And Harvard stepped up last year and said $100 million fund. We recognize what happened here at the university, and that there were opportunities that were blocked from, and more than that, we built our wealth on the backs of.
That's right.
So that was a conversation. They had their own task force. They came up with that, and now they're working to try to figure out, you know, what that looks like in terms of who gets reparations as a result of that. Now listen, we're in a city that has a fraught history. It's not that America doesn't have a fraught history, Traci, as you would say, but this city particularly has one. So unique. How do you proceed in having this conversation so that it is a civic discussion and not something that goes off the rails? I'll start with you.
Oh, wow.
Off the rails.
Right. You know, it involves a lot of stakeholders. It involves having members of the community as well as members from different areas of the community and, you know, institutions. I think it needs to be a very broad discussion.
So everybody at the table.
Everybody at the table, right?
All right.
And that might mean you got to expand the table a little bit and add a few extra chairs, right? But unless there is a conversation that involves people at every level within the society, I think it could stall. Right.
Okay.
It needs to be equitable.
All right. You Ed?
I'm really about generational approaches. I really appreciate that, and that's a lot of work that I've been doing, and I'm so glad that Carrie and many of the people that you work with and also the young people that I work with are ready to take this discussion on.
Because there's even younger folk on the task force.
That's right. That's why we need high school students on the task force. But that's it. We're going to have to approach it at, you know, we want the naysayers also to come to the meetings. We want to hear their voice so we can put their their thinking, their views, all that into this kind of writing document so we can have a really clear perspective of how we go forward. Because remember, we have to get the city council to agree on this and also the mayor to agree on this. So we want to make sure we have a truly vetted experience.
Right.
Last word to you.
This has to be an educational experience and be deep-rooted in community. And I'm so glad that the community engagement process is a part of the implementation of the way that we're going to do reparations here in Boston. Because as Ayanna Presley said, the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power.
So
And
they don't just come to you, you go to them in this process?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, it's about us meeting each other, right? And also, I am a part of a community. And then how do we engage the community and make sure it's a truly reflective process that is valuing the stories and the experiences of our lives as we live in America. So I'm really excited and blessed and honored to be on this task force. I'm super honored to be sharing the panel with amazing people, and thankful that Michelle Wu and the City Council has took this courageous and controversial step in making sure we look at the reconciliation and addressing the harms from slavery.
And just really quickly, you're really wanting us not to, or the task force not to reinvent the wheel, but to collaborate, perhaps
Yes.
even across the country.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Okay. You too.
And yes, definitely. And also state, we got to give it up to State Rep Bill Owens for his historic work on this. And just remember, this we're coming together. There are a lot of people, so we're just taking this and we're moving it on. This is just when it doesn't start here. We're just bringing it all
This
together.
is legacy work of
2
our
seconds. Will
ancestors.
this move HR 40?
It's hopeful.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me. That's the end of our broadcast and the end of the show. Thank you for joining us. And now stay with us as we continue our conversation on our digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. We're on YouTube and Facebook with our post show, continuing our discussion on reparations. Now, there's a core issue here which is being discussed everywhere, not just in Boston, or will be discussed as you all get there. U.S.-born descendants of African slaves or the broader diasporic group. Where are you two in that, and what's the decision about who's on the task force and where these reparations should be directed?
Wow, that's a loaded question, and I think that's what we're going to be looking at and studying to figure out what that actually means, what the historic reparations actually is, and how we're going to approach it here in the city in Boston.
So, U.S. born? Are you U.S. born?
Let me see. I've like so many generations. You know what I mean?
But the bottom line, I'm just trying to get to.
Let me see. 1800s. Yeah, I've been in Cambridge since the 1800s.
I
In
know,
Boston.
but the point is you're U.S. born and not from the wider diaspora. Is my point.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, I got lots of West Indian in me.
Yeah,
I know I have lots out of Georgia. I have a lot of that as well. Virginia.
Okay. All right. Where are you, Carrie?
I am a U.S.-born descendant of slavery, and my family is from Boston and Alabama.
Okay. So how do you, this is part of the conversation,
Yes,
obviously.
the big part.
And are there members of the committee that represent across the spectrum of lineage, or you do not know that yet? Perhaps
We
you
don't know that yet.
Okay.
We're still in the phase of getting to know each other and build as a team.
Okay. And do you have any sense now about what other cities are doing around that particular issue of lineage? Any idea? Because I know you've been talking about it for a year with groups. Is that something that y'all explored?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I know that other municipalities and other cities are looking at lineage-based, which is also a controversial issue as well, because when you talk about, tracking the lineage of the descendants of slavery, we're also talking about confidentiality. We're also talking about protection and privacy of the DNA of Black people, because we know that so much has been disclosed when it comes to our personal information. So, but other cities and municipalities have been looking at it through a means of lineage. I know that if you test my lineage right now, that it will show that I am a descendant of slavery, and that's within my family because my roots go back to Alabama.
All right, so Traci, talk about this particular situation. Do you know broadly, or even in a small way, what's happening in other communities and how this issue is being handled?
different communities are addressing it differently, right? I mean, you can, the line that I'm hearing most often is that it will be, these reparations will be for the descendants of African slaves here in the United States, not throughout the diaspora. You know, that's hard. Like, how I'm a little uncomfortable with the notion of, you know, of proving lineage, right?
Right.
Oftentimes information is not protected or used in the way that it says, you know, that they say that it's going to be used. And how do you go about doing that? I mean, maybe we look to, you know, the way that Native Americans are, you know, how do they prove their lineage in terms of being in a federally identified tribe? Maybe that's a way that it could be, that, you know, that it could be used. But, you know, I'm really not sure. I mean, how do you decide, you know, who's eligible?
Yes.
And also, there's so much stuff that hasn't been written down. You know, as I go back in my own history, I've just worked with my mother to find out who her grandfather was.
Right.
And it brought up that, you know, that she thought they were all from Virginia, but they weren't. They're from Georgia. And, you know, so I had to do this through doing DNA tests and all these other things. But it was interesting when I talked to my uncle about it. He said, you know what? I don't want to know. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you know what? Don't unveil things that I don't want to deal with anymore. It brings up too many painful memories for me. So I think we're going to also talk about that, about some of the historic harm that about the painful memories that some of this stuff might bring up as well.
I mean, it's not as if, you know, slaves were issued birth certificates.
No,
right?
They were not.
Right? So, you know, I think it's going to be very difficult to decide where the reparations will go and who they will go to.
I think also another issue that could come up on the table is, so let's be clear, there was slavery. People were enslaved in large numbers in the diaspora.
Absolutely.
So we
absolutely.
need to acknowledge that.
Exactly.
But okay, so now you have folk that moved from the diaspora to Boston and Massachusetts, and we have the Great Migration where folk moved from here north, but their roots were here. That what should have been available to them was not.
Right.
They were redlined or they were whatever. So there's a lot of sorting out of that as well. Yeah.
And people who move, you know, during the, you know, are part of the diaspora, they're still suffering the effects of
Yes.
slavery.
Exactly.
Whether they got here 40 years ago
Yes.
or 100 years ago,
Right.
they're still suffering those effects. Redlining, or it still affects someone who moved here 20 years ago, right? So should they be compensated for that piece of it?
Yeah.
Right? Or is there a sliding scale for how long you've been here
Right.
and how much harm you've suffered? You know, I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it.
I think you can look at it through an equitable lens, right? Like when you talk about the enslaved descendants that were here in America, right? You're looking at generational systemic harm. And then when you look at those of the African diaspora that moved here post-slavery, their experience, their ramifications of systemic harm, right? So you have generational harm, systemic harm, and then you have the rest of the African diaspora that comes here post-slavery experiencing systemic harm. And I definitely think that there's an opportunity to look at all of the harms that has been perpetuated and inflicted on the diaspora as the African community global, worldwide, because slavery was a global phenomenon, right? Right now, the focus is to hone in on how America uniquely perpetuated and inflicted harm on African people via slavery, American slavery, right? And then I think there's still opportunity to talk about the harms that colonialism and racism has played worldwide in our diaspora when it comes to our brothers and our sisters.
Yeah, it seems to me that as I look across the country for those cities and towns that have moved to some kind of, you know, maybe not the ultimate program, but some kind, they focused in on one arena and said that, you know, to your point, we're not going to be able to compensate for everything. So in Illinois, they moved toward housing. You know, as we've spoken about Harvard saying, this was our thing, so we're going to look at students and what we can do in that arena. And all around, there appears not to be, I can't think of a city or a town now, maybe you all know one, in which there is a blanket reparative, if I can make up a word, solution. It seems to be very much carved into the space and the place. So if that be the case, then you can put some frameworks on time and place.
Oh yeah, because it's a whole entire timeline. We're going 400 years back, and not only that, there are current models that are being presented in our city right now that has to do with compensating and looking at the reconciliation of the 60s and on. Right, up to 2022.
Right.
There are models currently looking at that and addressing the harm of the Black community, even if you are not just Black American, but also just of the African diaspora experiencing the harm post-slavery. So there's definitely an opportunity and conversations already happening to talk about the reconciliation and the healing for our brothers and our sisters too. I think the problem is there's a lot of internalized oppression right now that is being inflicted on, that we're inflicting on each other, when all of it comes from the source of the same chains, right? You know, and there's nothing wrong with recognizing that your struggle might distinct or be uniquely different from mine, and you might have a struggle of language access, right? And I'm going to stand in solidarity and advocate for you. And when we're talking about enslaved Africans of American slavery, you know, your struggle is different when it comes to a generational sense. So I think what we have to deconstruct is this internalized oppression of this oppression Olympics that this conversation has became.
Well, I get that. I'm just saying that it seems to me that in the end, there are going to be some parameters that are very specific to place and time, just because it's too broad. And Traci, you've said we need to, as we're having these conversations around African Americans, look at what happened in terms of reparations in the Japanese.
Absolutely.
And also Native Americans and indigenous people such as they are.
Yes.
And I would say that both of those groups, based on what I've read and heard, feel acknowledged in some way, but not necessarily, you know, compensated and repaired.
Right.
In fact, I just this week, there was a gentleman interviewed about the internment, the Japanese who were interned, and if folks don't know that, during World War II, they rounded up Japanese people, Japanese Americans and said, you could be an enemy like we're fighting overseas, and so we're going to put you in some camps. And I heard the gentleman say this week, don't talk to me about camps, we were incarcerated. That is the correct term to use.
Right word.
Well, he's not wrong. And so, you know, there are a lot of that. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, which was set up to try to begin to negotiate some of the harm done to Native Americans, indigenous people, you know, has not been, I would say, a stellar success. So here we are, you know, looking at that in the entire context. And I wonder if you think about all those things as you're proceeding, George.
I do, and I think about, I reminded myself of my my great uncle, who I'm named after, George Greenidge, from Roxbury in the 50s, who was a Pullman, part of the Pullman porters. And there was an agency called the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, and he wanted to become a semiconductor. But they said you couldn't because of his race. So he actually put a case against Pullman, and he won. This is like 1952, 53, and this was in Jet magazine. So I'm gonna tell you, so it happened. All right, it happened in Jet magazine. But it just showed you that, you know, here's a man in the 50s in Roxbury that decided, you know, the Pullmans hired lots of African American and Black men in the countries and so forth. Here he's trying to get to the next level, and they said no. He was training all these people, these white people, and they were coming right over him. He said, no, this is not fair. But this is an agency which government. State government created the Mass Commission Against Discrimination to actually step in to make these changes actually happen. And so this is the carry-on of what the government is supposed to do. It's to look at this, and it's to tackle this, and to make sure everyone has an equal playing field to get there.
Well, we can go back further to right after the Constitution of Massachusetts was put in place, when Quock Walker said, okay, I was supposed to be freed by my enslaver, was not, and I'm taking it to court. The result of his lawsuit, and by Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman, is what then changed, made Massachusetts in slavery. So that's a full circle moment in terms of the kinds of history that we have.
But this is what we want to document. This is
Exactly.
This is it. These are all these stories.
Right, because you can't argue with the truth.
Exactly. Unless you have the last word, Traci. This is a big deal for Massachusetts and other cities. You're going to be keeping an eye on it. You're not involved in the
Yes.
task force, the ACLU, I mean. So just your benediction, as this, if you will. Okay.
Well, it's definitely a great sign that Mayor Wu has established this task force, right? Right. We've got to start the conversation somewhere, right? And it's incremental. It's step by step. You know, I really hope that the task force takes it, you know, for what it is. We have got to move forward towards this issue of reconciliation, right, and of repair. And I think that's the real issue. It's not just about the money, right? It's about repairing the harm, the intergenerational trauma, you know, that is continuing to this day. And if this task force can take that on and address these issues, and Boston embraces, right, these recommendations and does the right thing, then we will have moved forward, you know, in unimaginable ways, right?
Great
Yes.
place to end. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.